Okay, welcome to 3D Character Modeling Animation Character Workshop and week 7. This is going to be basically a tutorial that takes you through some various sort of rigging type things for the upper body and some sort of other stuff as well. But I'm going to go through spline IK, clusters, constraints, control curves, and sort of generalized setting up with a hierarchy. Now, let me just first, I'll open the scene with the character finished, and I want to just first take you through some of the stuff that I'm going to go through before we go through it, so you hopefully have a clear understanding. So what we've got here is we've got a series of curves that I've put into the scene, which is a very common way of controlling a character, which basically means that you don't select the actual joints and you use the control curves to animate the character. So I can turn the joints off and animate the character with just the curves. I'll leave that on for now just so you can see what's going on. Let's come in here and show you this. But okay, essentially what we've got here is we've got a spline setup using something called an IK spline. Now what's happening here is we've got, I'll show you in practice first. Oh, hang on a minute. Just delete that by accident. We've got ourselves a situation where that's a bit too big. Where I've set up some spline IK that are linked to something called clusters, which I'll explain in a second. But this enables you to use translations to resolve the rotations in the actual spine. You can see you can move it in different directions. You can move it up and down. Now what I've done here is you can get some pretty comprehensive shapes in the spine, but also you can do things like you can rotate, and sort of stretch and stuff. So I've enabled myself here to use these controllers on the outside, which then control something called clusters down here, which are deformers, which then link into a curve which is on here. But I'll take you through how to do that. But I'm just going to show you a little bit about how it works first. Then I've got things that are controlling various bits of the body, which are linked in various different means and methods through constraints and things to enable the character to be animated through the joints. I've also got this thing called I don't know what it's called now. I've called it as hip rotate tool, which is linked into the top of the root node of the joints through a parent constraint, which enables you to rotate the hips separately to rotating them all together like so. Okay, so you can probably best have a play around with this a little bit before you start animating, before you start rigging this. You'll notice as well I've selected the move tool here, and it's greyed out, which is kind of indicative of some of the organisation stuff that we'll get to later on, but it sort of forces people to use the rig in a certain way. As you can see, sort of playing around with it. There's also this thing called a global a root control, essentially, which you can actually animate the character going forward, but also there's if you remember last week we did the IK on the set driven key on the rotate, so you can actually position this character quite effectively. And also there's the pole vectors, which we talked about last week. But you can see I'm going to take you through how to do this spine setup, and we'll deal with the hands and fingers and things next week. But essentially that's what I'm going to go through today. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make a new scene, and I'm going to open up, where is it? Let me open up my scene, just give me a second. Okay, so I've done a few things to the scene to get rid of, have I? Let's double check. Okay, I can still see the curve, and I'm just going to delete the curve. Give me a second, I'll set this up. Okay, there we go. So, what I've actually done here is you've almost certainly put a joint in for the whole character. So the joints in for the whole characters, you've certainly done that the week before last. What I've done is I've made sure that I've separated the root node here from the start of the spine. I want to deal with this separately. The hip thing that I just showed you, I want to be able to work with that. So what I've done is I've separated that off and basically enabled myself to start from the hips. I've made some curves. Now I've already done most of the work here, but I'm going to explain this. I've frozen transformations, so we've got zeros down here, and I've also made some control curves for the spine control curves. But I've purposely left this one a mess, so you can actually sort of see it. That's what we're after, because we're only going to need to rotate or translate that. So I'm going to start off by basically getting rid of these attributes here, because I won't need to use them. I've actually got keys in here because I've already set this up and it's seen that I've just quickly made up. So if I come into my where is it, channel control, in here what you can do is you can select attributes that you don't want on in the channel box, and you can move them into different areas. So that means you can sort of clean up, if I just close that, you can sort of clean up, like here. Oh, I've done the wrong one, haven't I? If I come into channel control, let me get rid of the scale, which is what I wanted, and I'll bring back the translate. So I'm going to look for my translate XYZ, so move those back into the where I want them. There we go. So you can see I can move them backwards and forwards. You can also, if I right click on this, go in and lock and hide selected, there, that one there, but that the channel control enables you a bit more flexibility. But a quick way of doing it is right click and go lock and hide selected. Okay, so I've frozen the transformations on that, which I don't need to talk about again because I've talked about it many times, and I need to make sure the pivot point is in the correct position. So if I press insert, so I've got it pretty much where I want it. Now what I want to do is, actually before I do that, I want to make some go through the process a bit more before I do that. We can see the pivot point here is already in the correct position because of the clusters that I've made, but I'm gonna put a spline IK on this now. So if I come into my skeleton and IK spline handle tool, so it's very similar to the IK handle tool, but it's for working with curves really, essentially. So I'm just gonna the default is with auto parent curve on. Now this will cause you some rigging problems if you leave it on, so we need to turn that one off. Now what that means is when I put a curve, when I click from here to here, you'll see what happens. So if I come in and click from the base of the spine, remember I've separated it from the root node, I don't want it on the root node, to here, which is where I want the spline to be affected. You'll see it's put a curve down the actual joints. Now what I need to do now is on those joints. Now what I can do is if I just get rid of my joints for a second and show non-show curves. Where's curves? I've got a mental block at the moment. Show curves. What you can see is put a control curve down the series of joints that I want you to control. Now what you can do, if I come into control vertex and grab it and then to turn the joints back on, I can now manipulate that particular those particular curves through those control vertices. Okay, so you'll see if I turn the joints back off, you'll see we've got 4 of these control vertices. Now it should, well, it's not quite there. Oh, I should have been a slight mistake there. If I show all and then get rid of the joints. Okay, so let me just so what we need to do is we need to in some way link these control curves onto this here. Now the way we do that is, if I'll just hide that for a second. The way we do that is we put something on it called clusters. So if I go to my right click and go to control vertice, and I'm going to make a deformer and use something called a cluster. Now what this is essentially this enables you to pick it's like a dummy object really, but it enables you to pick something and link something else to it. So we're gonna link, make some clusters. So if I just press apply and then come to my control and then press G, and then the last one. Well, let me just hide that for a second. So then press G. Actually, press apply. So what I've done is I've made these control curves. I'll just hide that for a second. And what I can, because we know that because these clusters, if I show and show joints. Okay, so this cluster that I've got here basically then does the same thing. Basically what's happening here is the cluster. it's hard to see the curve is there. The cluster is affecting the CV point on the curve, and the curve is affecting the actual joint chain. Okay, so if I just get rid of the joints again, and get rid of that, I'm just hiding these, Control H. So what I want to do now is I want to link these clusters to the control objects. Now, the way I do that is if I press Insert, I've selected my curve here, and because I've got a cluster, I can snap, pressing V, snap my point. So again, I've purposely made this one wrong here, but if I press V, snap the actual pivot point of this cluster to the curve. Okay, press Insert again. And the same thing down here with these objects here, so I'll deal with that in a second, but linking these in, the pivot point here for the global control hips is, again, I've already set this up, but I've set it up so it's on the point of the cluster, and I'm going to link this top cluster to this point here. Let's have a look here. Did I say I was going to link it to that? Maybe I won't. Anyway, I'll get to that in a minute. Okay, but anyway, so if I start off here, and I'll just show you essentially what I'm going to do. So, but the way I link that is to use something called a constraint, a point constraint. Okay, so what you do is you select the curve first, and then you select the cluster, and get rid of that, and then come into constraint, and what we want is on a point constraint, because all we need that to do is to move this around in space. I just reset the tool. Now, at the moment, if you put maintain offset on, it basically stops you from having to organise the local rotational axes for the cluster. Now, it should be the same at this point, because you've got a cluster which is made in world space, and then this is, I've already set this in world space. So, but it's probably just it's a security thing. If you were doing it to joints, for example, you'd need to click this on. So this just maintains an offset. So if I apply that, and I'm going to select the curve, and shift select the cluster, and press apply. What you'll find now is if I show the joints, and let's turn the mesh back on. You'll see that what I'm doing is when I select this actual curve and move it, it basically does what it's basically a control system, and it does the same thing. It's a reasonably straightforward, but when you first do it, quite complicated way of controlling the actual joint. So the curve is controlling the cluster is controlling the point on the curve, and then the curve is actually controlling the joint. So you can see it's a chain of different sort of causes and effects, and that enables you to not touch these and get rid of these completely, and just deal with the actual curves. Okay, so the bottom part. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is link these in. So again, if I come up to the cluster here, so if I show none, show deformers, so select, actually I need to show curves. Okay, so again, I'm gonna change this. Just give me a second.
Yeah.
Okay, so now what I need to do is, if I apply that, you'll see what's happening is I've already basically taken the controls off this one anyway, but this is just a matter of course, and it's something for it to follow. But so it just means that when I link these in, I want to link the neck bottom control to this control curve, and then the other ones as well, and the bottom one's going to be slightly different. So if I put my joints back on, what I want to do is I want to link the cluster to follow the bottom, the root node here. Now, to do that more effectively, what I need to do, because at the moment it's a little bit hard to get the positioning right, because obviously when you're dealing with this kind of thing here, I can't very easily select cluster and then the root node here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, and if I do select the cluster, if I show get rid of joints for the time being, and I'll just hide that for the time being. So actually, then what I need to do is I need to turn the joints back on. So joints back on. So if I just find where that cluster is just in it for the time being, so the cluster handles here. So if I come in and select the what I want is I want the node to work from the control object. So I want it to follow the control object, which is going to be the top of the the top of the hierarchy of the leg, so the root essentially, and then shift select that cluster. And again, bring the constraints back in. This time, rather than using a point constraint, I'm going to use a parent constraint. So constrain parent and maintain offset. So apply. So what we're getting again is a system where wrong one. Here we go. Rotate. So that's staying with the thing down here. So when we start working through this, we've basically dealt with the separate elements. I beg your pardon. What I meant to say was the other way around. So if you select the cluster first, if we can find it up here. So here we go. So cluster. Select the cluster, and then select the root of the separate hierarchy. Because what we want the cluster to follow that. So if I implement the add, what you find is that the constraint goes onto the. That's fairly easier. So select that there, add the root node here, and the constraint, the parent constraint goes onto here, which means that'll follow that. So that's kind of how you set this up. Now, there's a few other things you need to do as well. So you need to, so you can see that these things are now controlling. Oh, undo that. Oh, made a slight mistake there. These things are now controlling this. So it's also a matter of now linking these things up. So if I parent these and parent this to this, so I'm pressing P. Did I do that? No. Parent. Why is that not working? Let's have a quick look. Sorry, just give me a second. Okay, I've done it now. Sorry, there was a mistake in the. I'd accidentally parented it the other way around. So I accidentally parented the global hips control to the to this node here. So I just broke that and then changed it around. So if you look in here, so now the global hips controller, the parent to that. So and essentially, what you can do is, because I've got that working in such a way, I can then rotate these around. You notice that the net control and the different spline controls are doing the same things as I showed you in the first place. But you can go down, you can select certain parts and rotate them, and you can then also move, and translate them. So it enables you to have control. There are different ways of setting this up. For example, you don't have to parent them in this kind of parent-child relationship. So you don't have to have the spine control here as a parent of the other things. But one thing that I found is that it acts more like a proper spine. You can keep these separate and then link them straight onto this node here. But anyway, it's kind of a matter of preference and how you work with this. Also, there's matters of parenting the rest of it. But what I'm going to do is, rather than going through all of it, I'm going to open up the scene and do a little bit of what I did before. Just give me 1 second. So what we'll see here now is the file that I showed you in the first place, with pretty much the same thing we've just done, with them linked together. But what you'll see now is in here you'll see I've organised it all out to make it a bit easier to look at. We've got this hips, which I've moved off to the side here, which isn't parented to the global control. Well, sorry, it is parented to the global control, but it's basically that is a control object that we used, if you remember, for the for the controlling of the joints on its own, which is why we separated the spine off from itself. So you can see that's linked into the global control hips, but the root control is a new thing. So I made an arbitrary symbol here, which I've then linked in. You can see when I select it, what goes green is linked into it. So when I move that, you can see everything moves in the character. So that's kind of the global control, but then you've got these separate controls which enable you to, you see the hands aren't linked in. I mean, I could quite easily link those hands in by pressing P. When I move that, they move, but I've left them separate because I want to be able to use the IK in the hands, and which enables me to go back to them, to animate them separately, which is what I want. Same thing with the feet. I can move these independently of the the global control. Now, the global control isn't meant for animating this character going forward. The global control is really meant for, if I just zero these out. Excuse me, 1 second. Zero them out. When I press 0, I want to press 0. Second back to the field. That's an indication of you can see when I zero these nodes out by Frisian transformations, it takes it back to its default position from animation. It's a useful animation technique. So what we've dealt with here today, just to summarise, is we've dealt with the spline IK, which controls the joints in the back of the character, which is like a much simpler way of doing it. Now you can choose on the spline IK how many points you have, but I've chosen 4 points. I think the default is 4, but then you can actually add more, so you can have a more sophisticated spine if you've got like a dinosaur or a horse or whatever. I then use some control objects that linked into the clusters, which I deformers, which I put onto the spine. So you can see it's a reasonably complicated way of doing it, but once you do it a few times, you'll see it's reasonably straightforward. And then I've linked these things together, and the best thing to do really is to open up the scene that I've put in Blackboard and have a look at what's linked to what. Now this is a bit more complicated because I've got next week's thing on there as well, but you can, from this point of view, it's reasonably straightforward to look at what's parented to what. You can press this button, which enables you to move them around, which can help you sometimes with the animation process, so you can see what is where, and I've set them out so that it's kind of a logical order. But essentially it's a matter of using the constraints, the clusters, and then the control objects, but make sure that you've froze, that there's that one there that I need to just lock and hide. So you can see there's a different way of doing it. Lock and hide selected, but make sure they're all on 0, and make sure that they're all named so you understand what you're working with. So that's it for today's session, I think. Let's look at my notes. There's some general sort of good housekeeping type things which I don't need to go through too much, but obviously save your work at regular points and make sure you save them to say where it is. This could, saving this as spine finished or something. Also with iterations, also things like you need to test the rig. So I'd ideally just try a few different poses at this point to check that it's all working correctly. So you can go back and change some positionings, because you want to make sure that all this is finished before you go into animation stages. And as I've already mentioned about cleaning up the attributes, so it's kind of up to you, and to sort of how much detail you do that. But it's something which will help you when you get to the animation stages. So okay, hopefully you've understood that, and I'll answer any questions in class. So okay, thanks a lot.